We'll move to questions without notice, and I give the call to the Honourable, the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. My question's to the Prime Minister. As the Prime Minister is aware, early this month, Charlie Stevens, the son of the South Australian Police Commissioner Grant Stevens, tragically passed away as the result of an alleged hit and run. Can the Prime Minister share with the House his response to this tragedy?
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the Leader of the Opposition for his question that we discussed him asking today. Last week, a great many Australians read the extraordinary open letter from South Australian Police Commissioner Grant Stevens and his wife Emma about their youngest son Charlie. In their words, a lovable ratbag from the moment he could talk. Tragically, it was a letter in which Charlie's parents laid bare their broken hearts. Just hours after Commissioner Stevens addressed the state about the tragic shooting death of police officer Jason Doig, he and Emma received the news no parent ever wants to get. Charlie had been the victim of an alleged hit-and-run incident. The letter begins, "I am writing this sitting in a bedroom with dirty clothes on the floor, an unmade bed, 6 drinking glasses lined up on the bedside table, an empty KFC box next to the glasses, wardrobe doors left open, and a row of skateboards leaning on the wall. It is a mess and it's perfect. It's where 101 lived." Charlie was the 101st fatality on South Australian roads this year. Eventually the letter comes to this. 101 is Charles Hinchcliffe Stevens. Charlie, Charlie boy, Chaz, Link, Steve. You lived life and gave so much to so many. You're a force of nature, and we will never forget your beautiful, cheeky, disarming smile. It's little wonder that journalists who asked to read the letter on air broke down in tears. It is so deeply personal, so perfectly true to the life of one young man in one loving family. And yet it is somehow so universal, so faithful to the joyful chaos, the perfect mess, the vibrancy of our children as they grow into young adults, and so achingly powerful as it deals with every parent's very worst fear. And yet, even knowing that what prompted this letter is the cruel injustice of a young man snatched away from all who loved him and all he loved, what shines through is not anger or despair. It is an enduring and eternal love. But this letter was not written in search of sympathy. It was published to make us think, to ask us reflect on the true nature of the road toll. Not a number, but the bright and beloved heart of a universe, and a toll that has taken on all those who are left only with memories. Our hearts go out to Charlie's family and to every family that has ever been left to pick up the pieces. And I'd ask, Mr Speaker, that leave be given to the Leader of the Opposition to
Indulgence, the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I thank the Prime Minister for his words and for the opportunity to add to question. I spoke to the Prime Minister about the prospect of asking this question today, and I do so because I've had some interactions with Commissioner Stevens over the years and found him to be a thoroughly decent man, a man that's dedicated himself, along with his family, to the community of South Australia. Speaking with Neil Mitchell on 3AW last week about the very issue, and the reality is the Prime Minister points out that there are 100 families before this 101 who I'm going to speak about in a moment, who have gone through the same pain and suffering and always will at the loss of their loved one. And I undertook during that interview that I would read out the letter which has been penned by both Charlie's parents, Grant and Emma, and the letter reads as follows. I'm writing this sitting in a bedroom with dirty clothes on the floor, an unmade bed, 6 drinking glasses lined up on the bedside table, an empty KFC box next to the glasses, wardrobe doors left open and a row of skateboards leaning on the wall. It's a mess and it's perfect. This is where 101 lived. 101 arrived on the 28th of April 2005 and changed our lives forever. The last of 5, he was different. Cheeky, intense and funny, lovable, a lovable ratbag from the moment he could talk. He was as frustrating as hell, but he was also the kid who would look after others, befriend the lonely and help those who were struggling. Intensity shone through as 101 committed to each new passion, to Lego, BBL, scooters, footy, cricket, basketball, surfing, downhilling, Fortnite and his skateboard. It was all or nothing, and it was always all. 101 hated cheese because his brother did. He was a master of the air fryer, the NutriBullet and the steamer. He loved his mum's curried sausages, but he didn't know where the dishwasher was. His favourite pastime was pushing mum's buttons. Although a different name is on his birth certificate, F off Charlie was what you would hear most in our house, followed closely by put a shirt on or take your hat off the table. 101 loved footy. He loved the Cats, played 100 games for the Mitcham Hawks, then the Jets, the Goody Saints, the Camels and Westies. He just went to play and to be a part of the team. It was 101 who taught us you can't shower unless you have your Bluetooth speaker fully cranked so mum and dad can't hear themselves talk in the kitchen. 101 never wanted for soap, for shampoo or shavers. Someone else in the house always had it. Even a used towel. His enthusiasm for school saw no bounds except start time and schoolwork. But his enthusiasm for his family and his mates was real. 101 had a circle of friends the rest of us could only dream about. He loved his mates and they loved him. His friends' parents liked having 101 in their homes. He was mates with his brother's mates. Living with him meant waking up on weekends to 4 or 5 extra bodies in spare beds and on couches. It meant the family garage being transformed into a man cave where things parents do not want to know about or probably permit could happen. The only time we saw 101 truly angry was when he was forced to cut his precious hair for his sister's wedding in 2021, but he never went back to a hairdresser again. Being 101's alarm clock was a role his mum and I took up when he left school and started his apprenticeship. Get up, mate, get up, mate. Mate, get up. Are you not going to work today? Followed by drive safely and don't speed, becoming the morning mantra. 101 thrived at work. He loved working, loved his job and he idolised his boss. It meant that he had money for TA Tuesdays and Wednesday wings at the Feathers. 101 was adored by the sausage dogs, Grace and Zoe, who would sneak into his bed at night. On a good day, we would be lucky to see 101 for half an hour between him getting home from work and heading out with his mates, but it was enough. 101 is Charles Hinchcliffe Stevens. As the Prime Minister pointed out before, Charlie Boy, Chaz, Lynx, Steve. You loved life and gave so much to so many. You're a force of nature and we'll never forget your beautiful, cheeky, disarming smile. Son, brother, grandson, uncle, nephew, cousin, friend, workmate, teammate, so much more than just a number on a tragic tally.
I give the call to the member for Elra.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. How is the Albanese Labor government working to ensure reliable and affordable electricity? What obstacles has the government faced?
Give the call to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy.
Well, thanks very much, Mr Speaker. I thank my honourable friend for her question and thank her for her leadership in our part of the world, south-western Sydney. It's great to have such a strong Member of Parliament working so closely with her. And, Mr Speaker, the constituents of Werriwa, as the constituents right around Australia know, that we need more reliable energy and we need more of it quickly. And we need that because of the situation that we're dealing with, where over the last 10 years, for example, we had 24 coal plants announce their closure, equivalent to almost 27 gigawatts of power announced to leave the grid, and no coordinated plan to replace it. We know over the last 10 years we saw 4 gigawatts of dispatchable power leave the grid and only 1 gigawatt come on to replace it. And that has meant our energy system has been increasingly reliant on those coal-fired power stations that are left and that are ageing. And this has caused great challenges, Mr Speaker. Just in recent weeks we've had 2 units of one of the largest coal-fired power stations in Australia, Eraring, out of action, and we've had one of the Callide units out of action since May 2021 and not returning until May next year because of a major interruption. So we need more energy investment, and so that's why this government has introduced the Capacity Investment Scheme and also the Gas Code, both very important for reliable energy, Mr Speaker. And I'm asked what obstacles there are. Well, there haven't been many obstacles to the Capacity Investment Scheme because it's received such wide support from energy users, energy producers, climate groups, governments across Australia. Energy ministers met last week and the communique unanimously endorsed the Albanese government's Capacity Investment Scheme. Governments all across Australia, including the Liberal Minister for Energy from Tasmania and the Greens Minister for Energy from the ACT. The Tasmanian Minister for Energy issued a very strong statement. Minister Nick Daigan, a very strong statement on behalf of the Rockcliffe government, welcoming the Albanese government's Capacity Investment Scheme. So that's a big step forward. We know those opposite didn't get the memo. They don't agree with their Tasmanian colleagues. They don't agree with the former New South Wales government, the Perrottet government, which supported our Capacity Investment Scheme. But that's a matter for them. Also, the Gas Code, Mr Speaker. Now, the Gas Code was introduced, Mr Speaker, to ensure that there is an anchor on prices and also more supply. Now, the Greens have moved a disallowance. I said yesterday we didn't know how the Liberals were going to vote. Turns out they didn't know how they're going to vote either. They didn't turn up, Mr Speaker. They abstained. The Greens' disallowance motion was defeated, although when they looked around the Senate chamber, they found they were voting with One Nation, with Senator Babbitt and with Senator Canavan, who crossed the floor. Now, Mr Speaker, if you're a Green senator and you've moved a motion about energy, you look around and you find you're accompanied by One Nation and by Senator Babbitt and Senator Canavan, you might say we've made a rather large error, and they did.
The member for Deakin will cease interjecting immediately. The Leader of the Opposition has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Prime Minister, Australian sailors were injured by the reckless actions of the PLA Navy. Why didn't the Prime Minister raise the issue in his meeting with President Xi?
The call to the Prime Minister.
The premise of the comments by the Leader of the Opposition are wrong. And what we do when we organise these things, people who've actually, I raised yesterday the quote of the Leader of the Opposition himself when asked about his dealings. He said there was engagement with Fiji, and as to private conversations, detailed briefings that were conducted by DFAT and others, that's not something we will publicly comment on. Look, in relation to what I said or what my office said in briefings, I'm not going to comment on that. That's what he said in yesterday. I quoted as well, just to keep both sides of this dysfunctional political organisation on side. I quoted both Malcolm Turnbull and Tony Abbott. But it's also the case. It's also the case of the member for Cook. When he was Prime Minister, he said this: we do that privately. We do it directly. When we do these things again and again, we don't.
The member for Herbert will cease interjecting. The member for Wanner will cease interjecting, so I can hear from the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. This is a situation, a very serious situation, where sailors were injured. None of the quotes that you're relaying relate to injury of Australian.
Resume your seat, Leader of the Opposition. Yeah. The Leader of the Opposition is in breach of the standing orders by simply coming to the dispatch box and giving a secondary speech. If he wants to raise a point of order, he will always get the call. He needs to state the point of order. Just allow the Prime Minister to continue.
The member for Cook said this about China. We do it directly when we do these things, and again, we don't get into showboating about this sort of thing. We just do it respectfully and within the comprehensive strategic partnership that we have with China. It is very important to Australia, and it enables us to engage with them on any number of issues, which we will continue to do. But we're not about to do those things in a way that is public. They
Order.
then went on.
Members on my left.
They then went
the
on.
Member for Herbert will
and he
cease
said,
interjecting.
I'm not going to go into the discussion. That's what the member for Cook said. Didn't leak a text message
Order.
on that occasion, but said very clearly that's the case. And I make this point to someone who sat on the NSC for a period of time and all of that, that every incident with China on this government's watch, every incident that has impacted every Australian Defence Force personnel has been revealed publicly, has been gone directly to China as well to make our position clear. On this government's watch,
Order.
that has always happened, and that's something that I'd be interested in whether that can be said across the board. And he knows.
Order. The Prime Minister's time has concluded. Order. Members on my left. The member for Longman will cease interjecting. So I can hear from the member for Dunkley.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Housing and Homelessness. How will the Albanese Labor government's Help to Buy scheme help Australians get into their own home? And how does it fit into the government's broader housing agenda?
Good question.
Call to the Minister for Housing, the Minister for Homelessness and the Minister for Small Business. The member for Deakin is now warned. No interjecting before a minister speaks. It's pretty clear. The minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I do want to thank the terrific member for Dunkley for that question. I know that she understands that the legislation we'll be bringing to Parliament this week will help home buyers in her electorate and indeed across the country. Indeed, this will be life-changing for so many Australians, Mr Speaker. There are people renting at the moment that could certainly service a mortgage that can't get over the 20% deposit hurdle. Help to Buy will help those that are renting or living at home to get over the hurdle of this deposit. This is a targeted help at helping low and middle income Australians get into a home with just 2% deposit. The government will support eligible home buyers with up to 40% contribution for new homes and up to 30% for existing properties. This will help bring home ownership back into reach for thousands of Australians, and particularly for those that are renting.
The member for Cook will cease interjecting.
Importantly, Mr Speaker, it won't just be a leg up into home ownership with savings from a smaller deposit. Help to Buy will provide long-term relief to Australians that are part of this scheme. It could help eligible homeowners save hundreds every month on a mortgage. States will need to pass their own legislation for Help to Buy to operate in their states. The states and territory leaders committed to this at National Cabinet in August, and indeed just last week housing ministers reaffirmed, and they want to get this happening. Help to Buy will provide 10,000 places each year for 4 years, so we will be supporting more than 40,000 Australians into home ownership that otherwise would not have been able to purchase a home. Mr Speaker, as I said, this will be life-changing for so many Australians, particularly those on low and middle incomes. It is our housing agenda is broader than that, of course, with our regional first home buyer guarantee. The home guarantee scheme, where we of course expanded to include siblings, we included it to include friends, we included it to people that have been out of home ownership for more than a decade to get back into home ownership. Indeed, the expanded home guarantee scheme has now helped more than 86,000 people into home ownership since we have been in office. 1/3 almost of first home buyers are now entering the market through this scheme. Indeed, Mr Speaker, our broad housing agenda includes our $10 billion Housing Australia Future Fund.
The Minister will pause. because the member for Deakin is on a warning and he's been interjecting during this answer as well, he will now leave the chamber. Under Standing Order 94A. And the House comes to order. The Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Housing Australia Future Fund, which of course those opposite voted against, which is the single largest investment in social and affordable housing in more than a decade, that will build around 30,000 social and affordable homes over the first 5 years of the fund. It is just one part of this ambitious housing agenda that we are working right across the board, whether they be getting people into new homes, getting and supporting people in renting.
Time has concluded. Before I call the next member, I just want to do some acknowledgements in the House. I'm pleased to inform the House that present in the gallery today is a delegation from the Mekong Australia Partnership Masterclass, accompanied by the Honourable Rachel Nolan, former Queensland Minister. And in the gallery today is participants of the Stephen Fitzgerald Scholars Program and guests of the member for Nichols from the participants of the Country to Canberra Women's Leadership Competition. A warm welcome to you all. I give the call to the member for Wentworth.
My question is to the Prime Minister. In August, National Cabinet committed to strengthening renters' rights by ending no-grounds evictions, limiting rent increases to once a year and phasing in minimum rental standards. But 3 months on, not enough has changed. Renters are facing the highest rent increases since 2009, continued no-grounds evictions and rising power bills because of poor home energy performance. When will the commitments made by National Cabinet be implemented across all states and territories? And will this include ending no-cause evictions at the end of a fixed term?
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Wentworth for her question and for her engagement on housing issues, something that she has taken as one of the issues that she'll continually raise in this national parliament. We know that a lot of people across Australia are finding it tough to find an affordable place to rent. More than 30% of Australians were renting a home at the last census. We hear renters' concerns and we're acting to address them, and that's why at National Cabinet in August the Commonwealth, State and Territory governments committed to a better deal for renters to harmonise and strengthen renters' rights across Australia. Now, I'm asked about what has happened since then, because obviously state and territory governments are responsible for the implementation of that, and I can indicate to the member for Wentworth that at National Cabinet next Wednesday we of course will hear a report from states and territories as well about the actions that they are taking. But there certainly has been substantial action in South Australia. On November 1 they introduced landmark rental reforms to the Parliament to improve security for tenants. They introduced prescribed grounds to terminate or not renew a tenancy, extend the notice period to end a tenancy from 28 days to 60 days, allow tenants to have pets in rental homes, protect tenants' information, ensure rental properties comply with minimum housing standards, provide additional support for victims of domestic violence. In Queensland, the Palaszczuk government doubled the rental security subsidy after the Housing Summit to cover up to $10,000 for 12 months. And in the last quarter, between July and September, $9.7 million was provided to almost 1,700 new households for things like rent increases, bonds and other supports. In Victoria, on November 14, the Minister for Consumer Affairs, Gabby Williams, announced that organisations delivering support for renters in the private market can register for the $2 million rental stress support package, which is there. These organisations provide information, advice, advocacy and legal assistance to Victorian households. In Western Australia, on November 9, the Cook government announced that new regulations for unhosted short-term rental accommodations in WA, along with an incentive aimed at returning some properties to the long-term rental market to help to increase housing supply. All short-term rental accommodation providers to be required to register properties. New $10,000 incentive for property owners to transition existing short-term rental accommodation into long-term rental homes for West Australians, and reforms to provide consistency across the sector and clarity on what is required to operate a short-term rental accompodation property.
Give the call to the honourable member for Macon.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And my question is to the Minister for the Environment and Water. How is the Albanese Labor government working to deliver the Murray-Darling Basin Plan after a decade of delay? And why is it important for the Parliament to support these efforts?
Call to the Minister for the Environment and Water.
Thank you so much, Mr Speaker, and I want to thank the member for Macon for his question and for his support for the Restoring Our Rivers Bill, which is such an important opportunity for this parliament to finally deliver on the Murray-Darling Basin Plan. Of course, those opposite say that they also support the Murray-Darling Basin Plan, but in their close to a decade in government did everything they could to stymie and undermine the Murray-Darling Basin Plan. In fact, more than 80% of all water that has been recovered towards the plan has been recovered when Labor has been in government, just 16% under those opposite. Of the 450 gigalitres of additional environmental water, those opposite achieved just 2 out of 450 gigalitres, the target, just 2. And in fact, what they did is ignore more than 10 warnings from the Murray-Darling Basin Authority, from the Productivity Commission, in the Water for the Environment Special Account Reviews, more than 10 warnings that the plan was off track. Supposed to be delivered in the middle of next year. No chance that it would get there under the settings of those opposite. In fact, they say the plan's still on track. Yeah, on track to be delivered sometime around the year 4000 at the rate that they're going. Well, we promised we'd deliver the plan. That's what we're doing.
If he continues to interject,
the legislation, of course, is in the Senate at the moment, and what it will do is give more time, more opportunities,
the Deputy Leader of the
more money.
Coalition will cease interjecting.
And, of course, more accountability. And I'm very grateful to the Greens political party in the Senate and to Senator David Van, who have both publicly said that they will vote for the Restoring Our Rivers Bill, and I'm very keen to see other senators do the same. Because we know, Mr Speaker, that the next drought in Australia is just around the corner. We know that there are 3 million Australians who rely on the Murray-Darling system for their drinking water. We know that there are agricultural
the member for Mallee will cease
industries.
interjecting.
We know that there are other industries that rely on water in the system, and of course our environment. We know that there are 16 Ramsar wetlands, 35 endangered birds. We know that more than 90% of our native fish have gone, and unless we see this Restoring Our Rivers Bill go through the Senate, we won't deliver on the Murray-Darling Basin Plan. That means more water purchase because the projects won't be finished. By supporting Restoring Our Rivers, we support local communities and we support the environment.
Concluded. Before I call the Deputy Leader of the Opposition, the Leader of the Nationals was constantly interjecting during that answer. He is now warned. Give the call to the Honourable the Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
My question is to the Minister for Housing, and I refer to her train wreck interview this morning on ABC News Breakfast.
Order. The Minister for the Environment will cease interjecting. The Minister for the Environment will cease interjecting. The Deputy Leader of the Opposition is entitled to ask a question and she'll be heard in silence. Just also ask her to temper her language as well, as I have done with ministers before, and I give her the call.
My question is to the Minister for Housing, and I refer to her unfortunate interview this morning on ABC News Breakfast. The Liberal and National parties categorically rule out ever taxing the family home. Will the minister join us and rule out categorically ever taxing the family home?
Give the call to the The Minister for Resources will cease interjecting. The Minister for Housing, Homelessness and Small Business has the call.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. As I said in the interview, we absolutely are not doing anything for the family home that the member is indicating that we are.
The call to the order. Order. The House comes to order. I'll hear from the member for Chisholm.
Thanks so much, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. How are the Albanese Labor government's actions to relieve cost of living pressures specifically helping Australian women?
The call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Chisholm for her question, and the government has put enhancing economic opportunity for women at the heart of our agenda, and it is making a difference. Women's workforce participation is at a record high, providing more economic security for women. Today, the Workplace Gender Equality Agency announced the gender pay gap has decreased by 1.1% this year. This is the second largest single-year drop since the agency started collecting employer data in 2014. The government's work to demand more transparency and accountability in reporting the gender pay gap is having an impact. The executive CEO of the agency, Mary Wooldridge, said this: "Publishing gender pay gaps requires employers to understand the unique challenges, develop a purpose-built approach to gender equality, and then take intentional and sustained action. We know there's more work to do. We won't rest till we have closed the gender pay gap. Let's not forget that under the last government, women lost out. On their watch, Australia fell to 70th in the world for women's economic participation and opportunity. Now, under this government, Australia's World Gender Equality ranking has jumped up 17 places, from 43rd to 26, the largest increase since the index began way back in 2006. It's not surprising because of the action that we're taking: expanding paid parental leave, making childcare cheaper, implementing all 55 recommendations of the Respect at Work report, establishing 10 days paid family and domestic violence leave, investing $2.3 billion to end domestic violence, funding a 15% pay rise for aged care workers who are overwhelmingly women, and improving for the single parenting payment, helping 52,000 single mums. All of these measures are making a difference. They all are what has been seen as low-hanging fruit of economic growth and productivity gains. Issues such as support for childcare are not welfare. They're about economic participation, they're about productivity improvements, and they make a difference not just for women, but for the entire nation.
Give the call to the member for Wannon.
Thanks, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Immigration. When was the Minister first made aware that after he released 141 hardcore criminals, one of those criminals absconded? Can the Minister inform the House of the nature of this individual's crimes? And does the Minister know where this individual is now?
Give the call to the Minister for Immigration, Citizenship and Multicultural Affairs.
Thank you, Speaker, and I thank the Shadow Minister for his question. Of course, it was the High Court that required the release of the detainees, and this government, like all governments, is required to abide by the decisions of the High Court. Now, in respect of the issue he raises, I should be very, very clear about a couple of things. The first one is he would be well aware, as all members would be well aware, this government does not comment on operational or individual matters. Can I also say to members in this place, and to the Australian community, that the Australian community should be assured that all efforts coordinated under Operation Aegis are being made to track down this individual. And again, I commend the work of the Australian Border Force and the Australian Federal Police working with state and territory law enforcement officials to ensure community safety. And I might say two other things, Speaker, if I may, on this. Firstly, the High Court has just handed down its reasons for decision in the matter which led to this, a matter which, of course, the Commonwealth vigorously opposed the case brought by the plaintiff. I make that very clear. We will be considering those reasons for decisions, and I hope working with all members and indeed all senators to put in place a strong legal framework, an enduring legal framework for community safety. But on that note, I remind the Shadow Minister and all members that yesterday a bill passed through the House. A bill passed through the House to strengthen the regime for community safety.
Order. The Leader of the Opposition will cease objecting. The Minister will. The Minister for Home Affairs and the Leader of the Opposition. I'm trying to call the member for Wannon on a point of order. Well, I haven't called you yet. Just wait. You'll get the call when everyone settles down. The member for Latrobe is warned. Do not interject while I'm trying to take a point of order from the Shadow Minister. The member for Wannon has the call.
Goes to relevance, Speaker. The minister wasn't asked about the legislation that had a lot of shortcomings yesterday.
Resume your seat. 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 The member for Moreton will leave the chamber under 94A. The Leader of the House.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The question referred to the full number of people who had been released following the orders of the High Court. The legislation that is being referred to was directly relevant to actions being taken against those people. And those opposite might be embarrassed that they voted against those tougher conditions, but it's relevant to the question they just asked.
The member for Wannon will cease interjecting. The Minister for Infrastructure will cease interjecting. The Leader of the Opposition and the Deputy Leader, for good measure, will all cease interjecting. The Minister was asked a question about a specific individual. He is addressing the topic of the question. I'm going to ask him for the remainder of his question to address and keep it relevant to the original question. Here's the call.
Well, thank you very much, Speaker. I think the issue here is the Shadow Minister knows I have directly dealt with his question, but he doesn't like being reminded that twice yesterday, twice he voted against offence provisions that go to visa conditions that he proposed to keep people safe. He voted also against arrangements to improve electronic monitoring. He, like the Leader of the Opposition, likes to talk tough, he likes to talk about strength, but his voting record is exactly the opposite. Tough talk does not keep communities safe. Strong laws do. Why won't they vote for them?
Member for Blair has the call.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Home Affairs. What has the Albanese Labor government done to keep Australian communities safe since the High Court decision and NZYQ, and have there been any barriers to the government's plans?
Members on my left, before the Minister begins, the House will come to order. There is far too much noise on my left. The Minister for Home Affairs and Cybersecurity has the call.
Thank you, Speaker. I'm grateful for the question from my friend, the member for Blair, and it gives me the opportunity to address the complete hypocrisy of the last question that came from those opposite.
Order.
Now, Speaker, the #1 priority of our government is the safety of the Australian community, and I want to credit the Minister for Immigration on the leadership that he has shown on leading us through what has been a difficult High Court decision, Speaker. Now, we always hope in Australian politics, and I certainly know that the community out there hopes that when it comes to matters like the protection of Australians, that the two major parties can stand together in a bipartisan manner. So let's have a look at what the opposition have done in relation to community safety in recent days, Speaker. What we have heard is a lot of rhetoric from those opposite talking about community safety. But we heard from the Minister for Immigration something unspeakable that has happened recently by a front bench member of those opposite, and that is Senator Smith, who wrote a letter to our government lobbying for the release from detention of a convicted child sex offender. Now, Speaker, this is a remarkable thing to have done. The fact that a person reached a position of power in this parliament and chose to use that position of power to advocate for a child sex offender, Speaker. Now, what we know...
Order. The Minister for Pacific Island Affairs, the Minister for Home Affairs will pause for a moment so I can hear, and I'll ask the Leader of the Opposition under the standing orders to state the point of order that he is asking the call for. He has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. It's on relevance. The Minister is missing a prisoner at the moment, a high-risk prisoner.
Resume your seat.
Doesn't know.
Resume your seat. You resume your seat. Before I call the Minister, the Leader of the Opposition is the second time he's done this today. It is not. The Minister for Home Affairs is not helping her or anyone else. It is not the opportunity to make debating points. If the Leader of the Opposition continues to do that, question time will not operate that way. It hasn't operated that way, and it's not about to start. This habit will cease. Otherwise, he'll be warned, and he may not remain here for the balance of question time. The Minister has the call and will be heard in silence.
Thanks, Speaker, and I think it's pretty clear that the Leader of the Opposition doesn't want to hear the facts about what members of his front bench have been up to. Now, Speaker, what we have heard is outrageous from Senator Smith, and that is that he wrote not once but twice to the Minister advocating for the release of a child sex offender. What we know is that this particular individual sexually abused a young girl, consensually and non-consensually, Speaker. He has been held in immigration detention by our government, and that is where we intend to keep him. Now, Speaker, I wish I could say the same of those opposite. Now, I would like to report that that's the end of where the differences on community safety lie between the two parties, but it's not the case, Speaker, because what we just heard from the Minister for Immigration is absolutely accurate. And that is when we brought laws before this parliament.
The Minister will pause. The Minister for Regional Development, the Assistant Minister for Foreign Affairs, is warned, and the Minister for Regional Development, if she continues to interject, she'll be warned as well. I can't hear what the Minister is saying because members on my right are continually interjecting. Ministers or not, you won't be here for the remainder of question time. The Minister has the call.
Thank you, Speaker. Now, it's not the only difference in approach that we've seen this week, and all of you who are here in the House last night would have witnessed something that was truly extraordinary to me, and that is when the Minister for Immigration brought forward strong laws to attach criminal offences for child sex offenders going near schools and childcare centres. The opposition came in here and voted against it. They voted against it. Now, Speaker, I want people to remember that as they listen to the debate over the coming days, because the truth is there is one side of politics here that is trying to do the right thing and adapt to the High Court change and do so in the interest of the community, another side of politics that's being hypocritical and just trying to score political points.
The Minister's time has concluded. Give the call to the honourable member for Hume.
My question is to the Prime Minister. Under Labor, net disposable income has fallen by more than 5% and interest rates have gone up 12 times. Our inflation is homegrown and we now have one of the highest and most persistent inflation rates of any advanced country. Why is this distracted Prime Minister making Australians worse off with his bad decisions and wrong priorities?
Call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the Shadow Treasurer for his question about the economy, a question that goes to the fact that unemployment is at historic lows, the participation rate is at a record high, the gender pay gap, as I said before, is at a record low, the number of women employed full-time is at a record high, business investment is up, the number of days lost to industrial disputes are down, The number of single mums getting support is up. The cost of childcare is down. Commonwealth rental assistance is up. Cost of medicine is down. All of this has been achieved without any support for any of these measures from those opposite. And most importantly, over 620,000 jobs have been created since we came to office, the most of any new government in Australia's history, and we are halfway through. Importantly as well, we've seen 2 consecutive quarters of real wages growth.
You gave us negative.
We saw the increase of the minimum wage on not once but 2 occasions, which made an enormous difference.
The Prime Minister will pause. The member for Hume on a point of order. I need him to state the point of order.
Relevance, Mr Speaker. The question was about Labor's long list of economic failures. He could just talk about one of them, and that would be relevant.
Seat. The question had a number of moving parts to it, and it finished with about the Prime Minister's priorities. If you're going to ask a question with a tag at the end, he will be able to obviously respond to that. So you've made a claim at the end of the question, and that's what he's responding to, and he's talking about economic data. I don't know how he can... Well, that's the question, and he's answering it. So if you don't want that, don't ask him, and he won't be able to compare and contrast. The Prime Minister has the call. Order.
Thanks, Mr Speaker.
Order.
It was pretty good. Order. This bloke's lost 2 pre-selections in the last week.
The Prime Minister will return to the question.
Those opposite said that increase in the minimum wage would wreck the economy.
Order.
And remember when we had the Secure Jobs Better Pay laws, this is what they said. It would return Australia to the dark ages. It would close down the economy and supermarket shelves would be bare. That's what they said, would be bare. Energy bill relief, the member for New England said it was Venezuelan communism. Venezuelan communism.
Order.
With every single measure that we have supported, those opposite have opposed it. We're making childcare cheaper and moving to make it more universal and affordable.
The member for Barker is warned.
We're rescuing aged care from neglect. We're writing emissions reduction targets into law and making a difference. We're investing in new housing projects. We are acting on all of these measures,
on my left.
while those opposite have nothing positive to offer the country. Nothing positive, just saying no, all negativity defined by what they're against.
Give the call to the honourable member for Cunningham.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Immigration, Citizenship and Multicultural Affairs. How is the Albanese government working to change laws to keep the community safe? And what approaches has the government rejected?
Call to the Minister for Multicultural Affairs, Citizenship.
Very much, Speaker, and I thank my friend, the member for Cunningham, who, like all of us on this side of the House, is determined to do everything we can in this place to keep communities safe. And I'm sure she joins me in thanking the outstanding members of the Australian Border Force and the Australian Federal Police who have been working so hard with state and territory authorities to ensure community safety. Now, as I said earlier, yesterday this House passed legislation to make strong laws stronger following the High Court's decision in the NZYQ case. Now, as we consider the Court's reasons for decision, we are getting on with the job with doing all we can to keep communities safe, including by introducing new offence provisions which target those visa holders who have offences that relate to children and young people. But yesterday, members opposite voted against these laws not once but twice. That is an approach that we reject. And on the same day, the Leader of the Opposition was silent about Liberal frontbencher Senator Smith, his request for a convicted pedophile to be released from detention on Christmas Island. Senator Smith wrote, After developing a relationship with a younger girl, he was convicted in 2015 for sexual penetration with a girl over the age of 13 and under the age of 16. That's a quote. The frontbencher went on to ask that he be transferred from Christmas Island. Well, Senator Smith acknowledged the seriousness of this man's offending, as we all must, but still requested he be released into the community anyway. And the question really is this: how can the Leader of the Opposition stand by a member of his leadership team calling for a paedophile to be released? He has, in the past, he's called for members of Parliament to resign for the very same thing. He has said, and I quote him now, "Why would a member of Parliament defend anyone who has been convicted of paedophilia?" Yet a member of his leadership team has done exactly the same thing. Once again, he talks tough but acts weak. And back in 2018, when he was the minister responsible for immigration detention, media reports indicate that detainees at immigration detention centres escaped more than 80 times. More than 80 times! That, once again, he talks tough and he acts weak. His 2 decades in public life where he has contributed nothing positive other than talking himself up, full of bluff and bluster signifying absolutely nothing. And here, this issue is a test to his words. He should stick to his words and agree that Senator Smith's letters are unacceptable, in which case his position is unacceptable, or his silence must be taken as an endorsement.
Order. Give the call to the honourable member for Ryan.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Ahead of the Global Climate Summit, thousands have blockaded the world's...
The member will resume her seat. I need to hear the question, which means the House needs to come to order. I don't have the question. I don't know what the question is. People expect to make rulings on the question. I've got to hear the question. And the member for Ryan deserves to be heard in silence as a mark of respect.
Thank you, Speaker.
Give her the call.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Ahead of the Global Climate Summit, thousands have blockaded the world's biggest coal port in Newcastle. Some coal exports were stopped and over 100 people were arrested. This growing rising tide movement says if Labor won't stop more coal and gas, they will. They're planning even bigger actions next year. Prime Minister, do you agree with the Greens that these people are heroes and should be congratulated?
Give the call to the Minister. Order. Give the call to the Minister for the Environment, to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy.
Mr Speaker, I thank the honourable member for her question, but I'll tell the House what doesn't reduce emissions and doesn't create jobs. Riding on a kayak around Newcastle Harbour doesn't do that. Policy does that, Mr Speaker. Policy of this government does that. Creating the jobs of the future for the hunter does that, Mr Speaker. Creating green energy jobs like the hydrogen hub for the Newcastle port, which we have announced and implemented, Mr Speaker. That's what reduces emissions, and that's what creates jobs for the people of Hunter. The people of the Hunter know that the jobs of the future are clean energy jobs. They know that they are jobs that are related to green hydrogen and offshore wind. They are the jobs that are related to creating energy, not just for Australia, but for our region, and exporting that energy, Mr Speaker. That's what this government is getting on with the job of doing. And we are also, Mr Speaker, we are also managing a complicated transition. And I've got to say, Mr Speaker, if I was a member of the Greens, I would not have chosen today to ask this government a question about new gas, Mr Speaker. I would have taken a different judgment call, because yesterday the Greens voted with One Nation and with Senator Babbitt and with Senator Canavan to overturn the Code of Conduct, which requires any new gas to be sent to the domestic market. Now, Mr Speaker, the Greens have previously said a New South Wales member called for the Code of Conduct. A Greens MP called Sue Higginson called for the Code of Conduct and said any guarantee that Australian gas will be reserved for domestic use must come with price caps that ensure domestic supply prices are not being driven by energy profiteering following armed conflict around the world. That's what the gas code does, Mr Speaker, which they just tried to overturn, Mr Speaker. They voted to overturn the gas code, the bit of regulation of the gas industry. They talk tough and say they're anti-gas. We bring down a regulation to actually anchor prices and to ensure that domestic supply is secured, not international supply, and they try and overturn it.
And they go in with their mates, the new coalition of craziness, Mr Speaker. One Nation and the Greens. I mean, you couldn't make this stuff up. You really couldn't make it up. Now, I'll tell you what, Mr Speaker, the Greens embark in slogans and protest. We embark in policy and progress, Mr Speaker. That's what we are delivering. Jobs are the future for the people of Hunter. Emissions down, driven by the great energy regions of Australia, including the Hunter and the Illawarra and Gippsland and so many others, Mr Speaker. That's what good policy does. Engineers this most massive economic transformation. That's what this government is leading. The Greens can engage in protest when they can vote with One Nation and Senator Babbitt and Senator Canavan on their silly little stunts. We'll be getting on with the job.
The call to the honourable member for Macarthur.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. My question is for the Minister for Health. How is the Albanese Labor government taking action on vaping to protect the health of Australians, particularly our children? Why is strong action needed, and what options has the government considered and rejected?
The call to the Minister for Health and Aged Care.
Thank you, Speaker, and I thank the member for Macarthur for his question. Two great things happened in 1984, Mr Speaker. Medicare kicked off and a young Dr Freelander started medical practice. And I feel so lucky to have him as a member of our government and our caucus, giving us the benefit of his big brain and his long experience. Well, Mr Speaker, Australia right now is grappling with a new public health menace. Vaping right around the world was sold to communities as a therapeutic good that would help hardened smokers kick the habit when they tried a whole range of other smoking cessation supports with no success. But it's now clear we were all deliberately deceived. It is now beyond doubt that this is a product that is being deliberately targeted at recruiting a new generation, our youngest generation, to nicotine addiction. You just have to look at these products, Mr Speaker. They're brightly coloured, they have cartoon figures on them, pink unicorns and things like that, bubblegum flavours. They're often marketed as highlighter pens and USBs, so students can hide them in their pencil cases without being detected by teachers and their parents. Mr Speaker, most tragically, this deliberate strategy from the tobacco industry is working. 1 in 6 high school kids are vaping, 1 in 4 young adults are vaping. We know over the course of the exam period that just has been underway, Year 11s and Year 12s have had to have nicotine patches on to get through an exam without having a vape. We know this is now the #1 behavioural issue. The Education Minister tells me all the time. The #1 behavioural issue in our school communities that parents and teachers and school leaders talk about. We also know, Mr Speaker, that young vapers are 3 times more likely to take up cigarettes, and they are now the only cohort in the community, our youngest Australians, the only cohort where smoking rates are going up. Now, some say in the community it's gone too far. We should just raise the white flag and accept that this is now part of the Australian way of life and maybe derive a bit of revenue from it on the way. That, I think, to their discredit, is the position of the National Party and some others in the Coalition Party room. And that is why Greg Hunt was rolled by the Coalition Party room when he tried to snuff this out at the start and put in place an import control. Well, that is not the approach of this government, Mr Speaker. We're not going to give in to this deliberate, cynical strategy by the tobacco industry to undo 5 decades of tobacco control efforts. We'll do what the former government should have done. On the 1st of January, it will be illegal to import any disposable vapes into this country. Over the course of the following months, we'll put in place more regulation to ensure that our kids are protected, that the ABF is properly resourced, that the TGA is properly resourced, and we snuff this out for good.
Concluding. Call to the Prime Minister.
I ask further questions to be placed on the notice paper.